Concur, I really have, I suppose I welcome the fact that the government is acknowledging that spiralling energy costs are going to have a very detrimental effect on households across this state. However, they're going to have an equally detrimental effect on many businesses across this state, and that's really not being adequately addressed at all by this measure. I'm not suggesting that only businesses should be helped to deal with this issue, but I do think they also need to be equipped to deal with this issue. But this is just one facet of the inflationary times we're now living in. It's something that I raised some time ago, and it's something that, for me, is an obvious consequence of the pandemic, and I wouldn't blame anybody for the pandemic, but equally it's considerably exacerbated by government responses across the world to the pandemic, and very few government responses have been as exaggerated and hysterical as your government's response, Minister. I appreciate that you didn't determine this response in any way, but you happen to be sitting in that seat right now. On the issue of longer-term energy security, though, I mean, I've heard a lot of what I would consider aspiration from the government benches. TDs, including Deputy Ledden from Limerick, who I would sometimes find myself in agreement with. I agree, and I greatly look forward to the day when we're powering or providing a huge amount of energy to other countries and we're self-sufficient for energy. But we're not there now, and we're not going to be there next month, and we're not going to be there next year. But what we now are finally accepting is that we are going to have an energy crisis next month, and we're going to have an energy crisis next year, and we're going to have a crisis around inflation next month and next year, and we're hopelessly ill-equipped to deal with it. Now, I represent the constituency of Clare. Clare has a long and very proud history of producing energy for this state in the form of the Shannon scheme in Ardnacrusha, which was obviously hugely innovative when it was developed. It was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, hydroelectric station in Europe when it was developed. And then, of course, Moneypoint was equally developed in Clare, and the two arcs of transmission that go from Moneypoint to Dublin, which simply could not be built now because they're pylons, and we all know that there's a lot of controversy around pylons and there's a lot of planning issues, and rightly so, but they are there. They are a hugely important piece of infrastructure. So, like Deputy Ledden and many other TDs who spoke, I greatly look forward to the day when we're bringing onshore energy from off the west coast of Ireland. But we simply do not, and I've spoken to people intimately involved in trying to advance this and develop the potential to bring it onshore. But we simply do not have the energy now to generate electricity or we simply do not have the technology now to generate electricity off the west coast of Ireland. Yes, the technology exists for offshore energy, but that's anchored turbines, which are probably suited for construction in the Irish Sea. But if you're looking at constructing turbines off the west coast of Ireland, it's a very different matter in huge Atlantic storms. I'm reminded of, I don't know, Minister, whether you've ever experienced an Atlantic storm or whether you've experienced the aftermath of one. I recall Minister Andrew Doyle, who once sat in that seat that you're in now, and indeed Eamon O'Queeve, who also sat in that seat. We went to the Aran Islands immediately in the aftermath of one, and it's quite a sight to behold. And I don't think it's something that we can sort of take for granted that we're going to have the technology to harness that energy, that given the huge pressures that are put on during Atlantic storms, that we're going to have that technology immediately. Yes, everybody is hopeful, everybody's confident that it can be developed, but it's not there yet. So my question mark is, given that it's not there yet, why on earth are we powering down Moneypoint now? I am very proud of Clare's history in generating energy. I'm not proud of the fact that Moneypoint is belching out noxious gases into the environment. I'm not at all proud of that. I greatly look forward to the day when it's replaced with clean energy, as I'm sure you do. But I accept the reality that it's not going to be today, it's not going to be tomorrow, it's not going to be next month or next year, and we are going to need energy in all of those times, especially when the wind isn't blowing, because we have to power the incubators, the hospitals and our industries when wind isn't blowing too. And of course, the advantage that Moneypoint will have is that, hopefully there'll be hydrogen technology. We'll be able to bring the energy on shore. There'll be huge, vast amounts of energy, and we can turn that into hydrogen and store it in the form of hydrogen. All of that is I welcome as much as you do, and I know that you do welcome it, Minister. But what I want to know is, what are we going to do now other than give households €100? Because with the greatest of respect, it's what you're proposing and what the government is proposing is like a fart in a hurricane. It's utterly irrelevant to the scale of the problem that faces us. Like, if we're going to accept that we're importing energy, then we must accept that we're going to import energy which is coal generated, and we're going to import energy which is nuclear generated. Now, I don't have the problem that some deputies have enunciated here in this chamber with nuclear energy. If I did, I wouldn't turn on the light in the morning, because there's nuclear energy coming into the Irish grid as we speak, and always has been for some time, and I'm sure will be for some time into the future. I do have a problem with coal-powered energy, and I look forward to the day that it's replaced. But I live in the real world, where it's not being replaced today, it's not going to be replaced tomorrow, and instead of generating it here, and instead of having some degree of energy security in this state, we're at the mercy of other states. Some states that are close friendly states, we hope, and states that are further away and maybe we regard as faraway places of which we know little, and they may take a similar view to us, they may not. But I simply, it beggars belief to me that we're powering down power stations in Ireland and importing exactly the type of energy that they're producing in the face of an energy crisis. And I would look forward to, I can't emphasise enough that we're not enemies on this. I'm not opposing the green vision for the future. I welcome it. I wish it had been done 10 years ago, as do you, where the technology exists. And there is considerable, the technology to generate offshore energy where the turbines are anchored is around for some time now. There's nothing particularly novel about it. There's no reason that we couldn't have more offshore energy in Ireland. But we're talking about offshore energy primarily off the Irish Sea, which is going to bring with it objections as well, because it's going to have to be closer to shore than the type of offshore energy that we're talking about off the west coast. But we need to be realistic that the technology that we're relying on to power our state is not there yet. And it's really, there's an expression throughout many parts of Ireland, I don't know whether you're aware of it, Minister, but it's live horse and you'll get grass. And that's what we're doing with regard to energy, and it's simply not good enough, because, if we can't power, one of the first priorities, there's a lot of hyperbole going about celebrating 100 years of this state, but one of their first priorities was to power this nation. And if we can't power this nation ourselves, then really we have no degree of independence, we have no degree of self-sufficiency, and we have utterly failed. And it seems to me that that failure continues, both in the aspirational approach, aspirations that I agree with, but we have to deal with here and now, as well as how we transition to something better. And also the failure to have a larger energy debate, because no matter how much wind energy we bring in, and I am, as I say, hopeful that the technology around hydrogen and converting energy into hydrogen might be the solution, but we really have to look at other alternatives. We can't just, I remember a woman came into my constituency clinic and she was objecting to a particular wind energy wind farm. Now, I don't have an objection to wind farms per se. I'm very concerned, though, when they're built at a height which can facilitate, as I live close to Slievachty and I know what happened in Derry Brine. It was an absolute disgrace, and the only thing that was worse than it was the state's response. Had to be brought kicking and screaming to the European Court of Justice twice, I believe, to remedy the situation. Actually, the situation has never been remedied. And now we're proposing to do something similar. We had a recent landslide in Leitrim and we're proposing to build other wind farms at a height. But there is a place, absolutely there's a place for wind energy. But I go back to this woman who was opposed to wind farms, and I said, well, what do you think of coal generation? She said, oh, that's awful, you know, awful. And then I moved on to, well, what about nuclear? She said, oh, that's even worse. I said, what's the first thing you did this morning? She said, I turned on the electricity, and I said, oh, where on earth do you think the electricity comes from? Now, I wasn't re-elected, as possibly as a result of comments like that. But I stand over the comment, you know, this is electricity. I know it's a silly, maybe glib point to make, but we do need power, and it is going to come from somewhere. No more than talking about data centres. As long as they're not in Ireland, they're not a problem. I mean, you know, we have to be real. We have to have energy. We have to have the least environmentally damaging type of energy possible as soon as possible. But in the interim, we have to be secure, and we have to have energy security. We don't have that, and I don't see any sign of addressing that, and that's a huge concern to me. Thank you, Cathaoirleach.